"Fix this helicopter, I'll kiss you right now." The voice cut through the hangar like ice. Jack Hunter looked up from his mop, still dripping with dirty water. His eyes landed on the Airbus H-145 sitting under the floodlights, its engine cowling open like a wound. He'd only been looking at it for a few minutes. Out of curiosity, Alexandra Holt stood 20 feet away, arms crossed, surrounded by a cluster of engineers in pressed shirts and lanyards. Her gaze dropped to his oil-stained janitor uniform. "You like staring at helicopters? Or are you dreaming of being a pilot?" Laughter rippled through the group. Jack said nothing, but the next time he looked up, it wasn't to stare. It was to open the engine. Alexandra Holt was born into aviation royalty. Her father built Holt Aerotech from a two-hangar operation into a powerhouse of civilian rotorcraft manufacturing. Her mother, a former flight instructor, left when Alexandra was 9. She died 3 years later, in a small plane crash off the coast of Maine. Alexandra learned early that love was temporary. Excellence was not. She graduated summa cum laude from Wharton at 22, took over operations at 28 when her father had a stroke, and by 34 had pulled the company back from the edge of bankruptcy. The press called her the Ice Queen of Aviation. She never corrected them. She wore sharp blazers, carried herself like a blade, and spoke in clipped sentences that left no room for negotiation. Her office overlooked the test facility in upstate New York, a sprawling complex of hangars, labs, and tarmac where prototypes were born and broken. She lived alone in a glass penthouse in Manhattan. No pets, no plants, no one waiting when she came home. She woke at 5 every morning, ran 6 miles along the Hudson, reviewed quarterly reports over black coffee, and was at her desk by 7:30. She had 3 phone numbers saved in her personal cell: her assistant, her lawyer, and her father's nurse. That was enough. Her days were measured in contracts signed, deadlines met, and competitors outmaneuvered. She attended galas in designer gowns and spoke at conferences where men twice her age called her ma'am and avoided eye contact. She'd fired 12 executives in 6 years. None of them saw it coming. She didn't believe in warnings. She believed in results. Jack Hunter had a different kind of story. He'd been a senior aviation engineer in the Army, stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan, responsible for keeping Black Hawks and Apaches in the air under impossible conditions. He could rebuild a turbine engine in the sand with a headlamp and a prayer. His wife, Sarah, had been a nurse. They met at a VA hospital in Virginia. She was kind, quiet, the sort of person who remembered birthdays and left notes in his lunchbox. They had a daughter, Emma. But after Emma was born, Sarah slipped into a depression so deep she couldn't climb out. Jack took leave. He tried everything: therapy, medication, long walks, but one morning he found her in the bathtub. Emma was 7 months old. He left the military 2 weeks later. He couldn't go back to a world that demanded his focus when his daughter needed his presence. Now, 7 years later, Jack worked the night shift as a janitor at Holt Aerotech. It paid enough to cover rent and Emma's school expenses. The hours let him drop her off in the morning and pick her up in the afternoon. No one at Holt knew he'd once sat in Pentagon briefings. No one knew he still kept his old toolkit in the trunk of his truck. To them, he was just the guy who mopped the floors and emptied the trash. And that was fine. Emma was everything. She loved robots, coding, and asking him questions like, "Dad, can you fix anything that's broken?" He always said yes. Even when he wasn't sure, she had Sarah's eyes and his stubbornness. Every morning, she made him promise to come home safe. Every night, he read her a story and tucked her in. She was 7 years old and believed her father could do anything. Jack worked hard to make sure she never stopped believing that. 3 weeks before the incident, Jack had been called up to the research wing to clean up after a test flight of the H-145. It was late, nearly midnight, and the engineers had gone home. The hangar smelled like jet fuel and burnt rubber. The overhead lights hummed in the silence. He pushed his cart past the helicopter, glancing up at the sleek white body, the Holt logo painted in silver along the tail. He'd always loved helicopters, The way they defied logic. The way they hovered between earth and sky like they'd made a deal with gravity. As he mopped near the control station, he noticed something. A screen hadn't been turned off. Pressure readings, hydraulics flow, temperature zones. He stopped. One of the readouts was fluctuating. Small, but consistent. A pressure differential in the turbine intake. It wasn't critical yet, but it would be. Soon. He set down his mop and moved closer, his eyes scanning the data. He'd seen this before. Mosul. A Chinook that had flown through a sandstorm. The fix was simple, if you caught it early. Catastrophic if you didn't. That's when he heard heels on concrete. Alexandra Holt appeared from the control room, tablet in hand, her expression sharp and alert. She saw him standing near the equipment. Too close. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" Jack stepped back immediately. "Just cleaning, ma'am." She didn't believe him. Her gaze flicked to the screen, then back to his face. "You were looking at the data." "No, ma'am. I was just security." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. 2 guards appeared within 30 seconds. They escorted him out of the wing, told him to stay in the custodial areas from now on. Jack didn't explain. Didn't defend himself. He just nodded and left. He'd learned a long time ago that some people didn't want to hear the truth, especially not from someone holding a mop. Later that night, back in her office, Alexandra reviewed the security footage. She watched him pause at the screen. Saw him lean in, his eyes moving across the data with surprising focus. But she also saw something else. Earlier in the evening, there'd been a hydraulic fluid spill near a catwalk. A maintenance tech had slipped, cut his hand on a sharp edge. Jack had been there. He'd helped the man to his feet, given him half his sandwich, and walked him to the medical station. Alexandra watched the clip twice. She didn't know what to make of it. The man was a janitor, but he moved through the hangar like someone who understood it. Like someone who'd been there before. She closed the file, saved it in a folder marked Personnel Notes. Then she forgot about it. 3 weeks passed. Jack kept to his schedule. Came in at 11 p.m. Left at 7 a.m. He mopped floors, emptied trash bins, and kept his head down. He saw Alexandra occasionally, crossing the facility with her entourage of assistants and engineers. She never looked at him. He preferred it that way. Invisible was safe. Invisible was simple, but he still thought about that pressure reading. He'd checked the maintenance logs online. Nothing had been flagged. No one had noticed. He thought about saying something, writing an anonymous note, but who would listen to a janitor? So he kept quiet. He went home. He made breakfast for Emma. He helped her with her homework. He read her bedtime stories about astronauts and explorers, and he told himself it wasn't his problem anymore. He'd left that world behind. He was a father now. That was enough. But deep down, in the part of him that still remembered the smell of engine oil and the sound of rotor blades, he knew something was wrong with that helicopter, and he knew that eventually someone would have to fix it. The morning of the test run, the H-145 wouldn't start. The ignition cycled, the fuel lines checked clean. The diagnostics came back normal, but the engine refused to turn over. Engineers from MIT, Caltech, and Oxford gathered around the machine like surgeons over a dying patient. They ran tests, swapped components, recalibrated systems. Nothing worked. Alexandra stood in the center of the hangar, her jaw tight, her hands clasped behind her back. This wasn't just a test flight. It was a demonstration for a potential client, a medical transport company from Seattle worth $40 million. If the helicopter didn't fly, the deal was dead, and if the deal died, 3 other contracts would follow. Dominoes. She'd built her reputation on reliability, on precision, on never missing a deadline. This couldn't happen. Not today. She turned, scanning the room for answers, and that's when she saw him. Jack Hunter, mopping near the far wall. But he wasn't mopping. He was looking at the helicopter, specifically at the pressure valve housing near the turbine intake. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. His eyes moved across the engine, cowling with an intensity that didn't match his uniform. Alexandra felt something flicker in her chest. Annoyance, curiosity. She wasn't sure which. She walked over. The engineers fell silent, watching. She stopped 5 feet from him. "You." Jack looked up. His face was calm, unreadable. "Yes, ma'am?" She gestured to the helicopter. "You've been staring at it for 10 minutes. See something we don't?" A few of the engineers smirked. One whispered something to another. Someone laughed softly. Alexandra didn't smile. She just kept her eyes on Jack, waiting. "Tell you what," she said, her voice cold and clear as glass. "Fix this helicopter, and I'll kiss you. Right now. In front of everyone." The hangar went completely silent. Someone's tablet beeped. No one moved to silence it. Jack didn't flinch. He just looked at her, then at the helicopter, then back. His expression didn't change. "And if I can't, you're fired. No severance, no insurance, no final paycheck." She crossed her arms. "Do we have a deal?" One of the engineers, a man in his 50s with a Caltech ring on his finger, spoke up. "Miss Holt, with all due respect, he's a janitor. He doesn't have clearance to touch you." "I'm aware of what he is." Her tone cut him off cleanly. She didn't take her eyes off Jack. "Do we have a deal?" Jack looked at her for a long moment. His hands were still holding the mop handle. He thought about Emma, about the robotics competition that night, about the workshop lights that had been out for 2 weeks, about the promise he'd made to always come home. Then he set down the mop. He didn't say a word. He just walked toward the H-145. The engineers stepped back. Alexandra watched him go, her arms still crossed, her face unreadable. One of the younger engineers pulled out his phone and started recording. Another checked his watch. It was 11:47 a.m. Jack stopped in front of the helicopter. He stood there for a moment, just looking. Then he reached up and ran his hand along the engine, cowling, feeling the metal, the seams, the bolts. And for the first time in 7 years, Jack Hunter stopped being a janitor. He became an engineer again. What no one in that hangar knew, what no one could have guessed, was that Jack Hunter had spent 6 years keeping military helicopters alive in war zones where failure meant death. He'd patched bullet holes in rotor blades with sheet metal and aviation-grade epoxy. He'd rewired avionics panels by flashlight while mortars fell 100 yards away. He'd once restarted a downed Black Hawk using a car battery and jumper cables because the auxiliary power unit had been shot to hell. He'd been decorated twice, commended 4 times. And he'd walked away from all of it the day he buried his wife. Now he worked nights and came home to a little girl who built robots out of cardboard boxes and asked him why the sky was blue. Emma was 7 years old. She had Sarah's dark eyes and Jack's stubborn chin. Every morning before school, she made him promise 3 things. Come home safe, don't forget lunch, and help her with her project. She'd been working on that project for 2 months. A small autonomous rover that could navigate obstacles using sensors she'd coded herself. The regional robotics competition was tonight. The prize was a full scholarship to a summer STEM camp at Cornell. Emma wanted it more than anything. She'd drawn pictures of herself wearing a lab coat. She'd practiced her presentation in front of the bathroom mirror. But the workshop at her school, the one with the good lighting and the 3D printer and the soldering stations, had been shut down for repairs 3 weeks ago. A wiring issue. A safety concern. They'd said it would be fixed in a few days, then a week, then next month. Emma had been working at home, under a desk lamp that flickered, with tools Jack had bought from a hardware store. He'd called the school twice. Left messages. No one called back. So when Alexandra Holt made her offer, Jack didn't think about the job. He didn't think about his pride. He thought about Emma, about the lights in that workshop, about the look on her face when she showed him the rover for the first time and said, "Dad, do you think I can actually win?" He told her yes, because that's what fathers do. They say yes even when they're not sure. Even when the world is stacked against you. Even when you're working in the dark. Jack had learned a long time ago that some problems couldn't be fixed. Sarah's depression. The nightmares that still woke him at 3 in the morning. The empty side of the bed. But some problems could be fixed. Engines. Wiring. Pressure valves. Those were problems with solutions. With logic. With clear steps from broken to whole. And if fixing this helicopter meant Emma got her lights back, got her workshop back, got her chance, then he'd fix it. He'd fix it if it killed him. He thought about the last conversation he'd had with Sarah, 3 days before she died. She'd been sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, and she'd said, "I'm sorry I can't be the mother she deserves." And Jack had said, "You're exactly the mother she deserves. You just need time." But time ran out. And now Emma asked about her mom sometimes, and Jack told her stories. About how kind she was, how smart, how much she loved her. He never told her about the bathtub, about the cold water, about the sound he made when he found her. Emma didn't need to know that. She needed to know her mother loved her, and that her father would never leave. So Jack stood in front of that helicopter, rolled up his sleeves, and decided that today, at least, one thing would go right. Jack crouched down beside the H-145 and peered into the turbine intake. The light was dim, so he pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, the same one he used to check under sinks and behind vending machines. He shone it into the intake valve and immediately saw what the engineers had missed. A fine metallic dust, almost invisible to the naked eye, coating the interior surfaces of the pressure regulation chamber. It was a rare issue, something you'd only encounter in extreme conditions. He'd seen it once before, in Mosul, on a Chinook that had flown through a sandstorm and sucked in particulate matter so fine it bypassed all the filters and clogged the compression system from the inside. The diagnostics had shown nothing because it wasn't an electrical fault. It was physical, mechanical. The kind of problem that required hands, not computers. He stood up and turned to face Alexandra and the gathered engineers. "It's the pressure valve. There's a blockage. Metallic dust. You won't see it on the diagnostics because it's not a sensor issue. It's physical obstruction in the compression chamber." The engineer with the Caltech ring scoffed. "Metallic dust? We ran a full system purge this morning. Standard protocol. Not deep enough," Jack said calmly. "You need to pull the valve housing, clean the interior surfaces manually, and check the compressor intake for residue accumulation. If you don't, it'll cycle fine on the ground, but fail again under load within 3 days." Another engineer, younger, with a Oxford University lanyard, stepped forward. "And, you know this how? You have a degree in aeronautical engineering we don't know about?" Jack didn't answer. He just looked at Alexandra. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Not mockery anymore. Something else. Calculation, maybe. Assessment. "You have until 2 p.m., she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Curiosity. Or maybe just the faint hope that she wouldn't have to call Seattle and cancel. If this bird flies by 2, you get your kiss and you keep your job. If it doesn't, you're gone. No appeal. No second chance. Clock starts now." She checked her watch. Then she turned and walked toward her office, heels clicking on concrete. The engineers dispersed slowly, muttering to each other. A few stayed to watch. Most didn't believe he'd even know how to open the cowling properly. Jack stood alone beside the helicopter. He looked at his watch. It was 11:47 a.m. He had 2 hours and 13 minutes. He thought about Emma again. About her sitting in that dark workshop with her flickering desk lamp, trying to solder circuits she could barely see. About how she never complained. About how she'd look at him with those serious eyes and say, "It's okay, Dad. I can make it work." But she shouldn't have to make it work. She was 7 years old. She deserved good lights. She deserved the same tools the other kids had. She deserved a fair shot. Jack took a breath. Then he walked to the custodial office, unlocked his locker, and pulled out the duffel bag he kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies. Inside was his old toolkit. Military-grade precision instruments. Some he'd bought with his own money during his service. Some he'd fabricated himself in machine shops on base. He'd told himself 100 times he should sell them. That he didn't need them anymore. That he'd left that life behind. But he'd never been able to let them go. He carried the bag back to the hangar, set it on the floor beside the H-145, and unzipped it slowly. The tools gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Torque wrenches, precision screwdrivers, a digital multimeter, a fiber optic inspection camera he'd won in a poker game in Kandahar. He picked up the first tool, a ratchet wrench, with a custom grip he'd wrapped himself. It fit in his hand, like it had never left. And for the first time in 7 years, Jack Hunter stopped pretending to be someone else. He got to work. Jack started by removing the engine cowling. 6 bolts, each requiring a specific torque sequence to avoid warping the housing. He worked quickly but carefully, his hands moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 similar operations. The engineers who'd stayed to watch exchanged glances. This wasn't the fumbling of an amateur. This was precision. Within 8 minutes, the cowling was off. He set it aside on a clean tarp he'd pulled from his cart. Then he disconnected the electrical harness feeding into the pressure valve assembly. 12 connections. Color-coded, but only if you knew the military system, which was different from civilian standards. He unplugged them in sequence, tagging each one with small pieces of tape from his toolkit. The valve housing came next. It was a complex piece of engineering, designed to regulate pressure differentials during flight. Removing it required detaching 3 hydraulic lines and a sensor array. One wrong move, and he'd flood the system with fluid, or break a sensor that cost $12,000 to replace. He worked slowly here, carefully. He could feel eyes on his back. Someone was filming. He didn't care. At 12:23 p.m., he lifted the valve housing free. It was heavier than it looked. He carried it to a workbench, set it down, and opened it. The interior was coated with that fine metallic dust. He'd been right. He used a microfiber cloth and aviation-grade solvent to clean every surface, checking his work with the fiber optic camera to make sure he hadn't missed anything. The dust came away slowly, revealing clean metal underneath. While the valve housing dried, he turned his attention to the compressor intake. This was harder to access. He had to remove a secondary panel and reach into a space barely wide enough for his arm. He used a vacuum probe to extract the particulate matter, working blind, guided only by feel and experience. Sweat dripped down his temple. His shoulder ached from the angle. But he kept going. At 1:14 p.m., he pulled his arm out. The vacuum canister was coated with a thin layer of metallic dust. He'd gotten it all. He reassembled the valve housing, reconnected the hydraulic lines, reattached the sensor array, plugged in the electrical harness. Every connection had to be perfect. Every bolt had to be torqued to spec. One mistake, and the engine wouldn't just fail to start. It would fail catastrophically, possibly during flight. By 1:38 p.m., he was reconnecting the final electrical connection. His hands were covered in grease despite the gloves. His back hurt. His knees ached from crouching on concrete. But the work was done. Almost. He ran a manual pressure test using a gauge from his toolkit. The needle climbed smoothly. No fluctuations. No drops. Good. He closed the cowling, torqued the bolts in sequence, and stepped back. The engineers had returned. More of them now. Word had spread. Someone had told someone who'd told someone else. Now, there were maybe 20 people watching. Alexandra appeared at 1:50 p.m. She didn't say anything, just stood there with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. He looked at her. Try it now. She walked to the pilot's door, climbed into the seat, and reached for the ignition. The hangar fell silent. You could hear the ventilation system humming. Someone coughed. Alexandra turned the key. The starter motor whined. The turbine began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster. The rotor blades shuddered, then began to turn. The engine roared to life, smooth and powerful, filling the hangar with sound. The H-145 lifted 6 inches off the ground, hovered there, steady, perfect, then settled back down. Alexandra shut off the engine. The rotors slowed, stopped. Silence fell again, heavier. This time, she climbed out of the cockpit, walked over to Jack, and stopped 3 feet in front of him. Everyone was watching. Phones were out. Recording, waiting to see if the Ice Queen of Aviation would actually kiss the janitor. Jack pulled off his gloves, looked her in the eye, and said the thing no one expected. "I don't need your kiss." Jack's voice was quiet but clear. It carried across the hangar like a bell. Alexandra froze. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Confusion. Maybe surprise. Jack wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grease across his temple. "I just need the lights in Emma's workshop turned back on. She has a robotics competition tonight. She's been building in the dark for 2 weeks. That's all I want, just the lights, so she can finish her project." The silence stretched. No one moved. One of the engineers lowered his phone. Another looked at the floor. Alexandra stood perfectly still, her arms still crossed, her face a mask. But inside, something was shifting. Something she didn't have words for. "Who's Emma?" Her voice was softer than before. Almost gentle. "My daughter. She's 7 years old." Jack met her eyes without flinching. "She's smarter than I'll ever be. She's building an autonomous rover. With sensors, she coded herself. She deserves a fair shot. That's all I'm asking for. Not money. Not a promotion. Just lights." Alexandra felt something tighten in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Not the performative kind she'd learned to fake at board meetings when someone called her ruthless. Real shame. The kind that made your throat close and your stomach turn. She'd used this man. Made him a spectacle. Turned his dignity into entertainment for a room full of engineers who'd spent 3 hours failing to do what he'd done in 2. And he hadn't done it for recognition. Hadn't done it for her. He'd done it for a 7-year-old girl who was building robots in the dark. "Done," she said. The word came out harder than she intended. "The lights will be on by tonight. You have my word." Jack nodded. He didn't smile. Didn't thank her. Just nodded once and turned back to gather his tools. Alexandra stood there for another moment, then walked away. Her heels echoed in the silence. The engineers dispersed slowly, talking in low voices. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else made a joke about janitors and helicopters. But most of them were quiet. Back in her office, Alexandra closed the door and stood at the window, looking out at the facility. She felt unsteady. Off balance. Like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She walked to her desk, sat down, and opened her computer. She typed his name into the company database. Jack Hunter. Employee ID 4732. Night custodian. Hired 7 years ago. She clicked on his file. The screen loaded. Education. Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. University of Virginia. Minor in Aerospace Systems. GPA 3.9. Military service. United States Army. Aviation Maintenance Division. 2009 to 2017. Rank at discharge. Warrant Officer 2. Specialty. Rotary Wing Aircraft Systems. Honorable discharge. Reason for leaving. Personal family matter. Commendations. Army Commendation Medal. 2. Meritorious Service Medal. Joint Service Achievement Medal. She stared at the screen. Her hand moved to the mouse. She clicked on his personnel photo from 7 years ago. It showed a younger version of the man she'd just humiliated. Shorter hair, clean-shaven, the same serious eyes. He was wearing a suit in the photo, an interview suit. The kind you wear when you're trying to start over. She closed the file. Picked up her phone. Dialed the facilities manager. Turned the lights back on in the workshop at PS 114. Tonight, I don't care what it costs. I don't care if you have to pull electricians off other projects. Get it done. Yes, ma'am. May I ask no? Then she sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her father, about the stroke that had nearly killed him, about the day she'd walked into the board meeting and announced she was taking over. She'd been 28 years old. Half the board had left. The other half had called their lawyers. She'd fired 6 of them within a month, rebuilt the company from the ground up, proven everyone wrong. She'd thought that made her strong. Now she wasn't sure. She thought about Jack's face when he'd turned down the kiss, the way he'd looked at her without anger, without resentment. Just tired. Just done. Like he'd been through worse and this was just another thing to endure. She thought about Emma, 7 years old, building robots in the dark. And she thought about herself at 7, sitting in her mother's Cessna, learning to read altimeters and airspeed indicators, back when flying felt like magic. Before it became business. Before everything became business. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Client from Seattle is asking about the test flight. Should I reschedule? Alexandra stared at the message. Then she typed back. No. Tell them the demonstration is happening as planned. 3 p.m. We're good to go. She set down the phone, looked out the window again. Somewhere down there, Jack Hunter was putting his tools back in a duffel bag and going back to his mop. And somewhere else, a 7-year-old girl was waiting for her father to come home and tell her the lights were back on. Alexandra pressed her palms against her eyes. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since her mother's funeral. But she felt something close, something raw, something that felt uncomfortably like being human. The next evening, Alexandra found herself in the employee parking lot. She'd told herself she was just checking on something. A routine walkthrough. Quality control. But she knew it was a lie. She was looking for him. She found Jack's truck in the far corner. An old Ford F-150, with a dent in the rear panel, and a faded military veteran sticker on the bumper. He was underneath it, tools spread across the asphalt. His legs stuck out from beneath the chassis. She walked over. Her heels clicked on the pavement. The sound made him pause. He slid out from under the truck, saw her, and sat up. Grease on his hands. Surprise on his face. Miss Holt, I owe you an apology. The words came out stiff. Formal. She tried again. What I did yesterday was wrong. I used you. I made you a spectacle in front of everyone. I turned your skill into a joke and your dignity into a bet. That was cruel. I'm sorry. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. He didn't look angry. Just tired. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Emma. I know. She paused. Did she win? 2nd place. But she got into the summer camp. Full scholarship. He smiled. A real smile that changed his whole face. She cried when I told her. Happy tears. First time I've seen those in a while. Alexandra felt that tightness in her chest again. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is an invitation. To the company gala next month. Black tie. Normally it's just board members and investors. But I'm inviting you. And Emma. There's going to be a robotics exhibit. MIT is bringing some of their competition bots. I thought she might like to see them. Jack looked at the envelope. Didn't take it. Why? Because I want to apologize properly, and because your daughter sounds brilliant. She should meet people who understand what she's building. Alexandra held out the envelope. No pressure, just an offer. If you don't want to come, I understand. Jack took it. Looked at it. The paper was heavy, expensive, embossed with the Holt Aerotech logo. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. Alexandra turned to leave, then stopped. Jack? Yeah? Thank you. For fixing the helicopter. And for reminding me what humility looks like. I think I'd forgotten. She walked away before he could respond. Got in her car. a black Tesla, that probably cost more than Jack made in 3 years. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then she started the engine and drove home. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Emma, about a 7-year-old girl soldering circuits under a desk lamp, about Jack turning down a kiss because all he wanted was lights. She got up at 2 in the morning, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen counter with her laptop. She pulled up the company's charitable foundation account, typed in PS 114. The school Emma attended. She authorized a $50,000 grant. New equipment for the STEM lab. A robotics program. Scholarships for students who couldn't afford competition fees. She submitted it, closed the laptop, and finally, for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. 3 weeks later, Emma won first place at the regional robotics finals. Her rover navigated a complex obstacle course in under 2 minutes, faster than any other competitor. The judges called it innovative, elegant, advanced beyond her age group. Alexandra attended. She sat in the back row wearing jeans and a plain sweater. No makeup. No jewelry. Just another parent in a crowd of parents. She watched Emma's face light up when they called her name. Watched Jack lift her onto his shoulders while she held the trophy above her head like a champion. And she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Joy. Not the cold satisfaction of closing a deal. Real joy. Warm and uncomplicated. After the ceremony, Emma ran up to her. "Are you my dad's boss?" Alexandra crouched down to her level. "Sort of. Are you his girlfriend?" Alexandra froze. She looked at Jack, who was standing a few feet away, trying very hard not to laugh. "No," she said carefully. "I'm just a friend." "Oh." Emma looked disappointed. "I thought you were pretty." Alexandra's throat tightened. "Thank you, Emma. I think you're brilliant." Emma grinned, then ran back to her dad to show him something on her tablet. Alexandra stood up slowly. Jack walked over. "Sorry about that. She's been asking a lot of questions lately." "It's fine." Alexandra smiled. A real smile. "She's wonderful." "Yeah, she is." Jack looked at her. "Thank you for coming. It meant a lot. To both of us. I wouldn't have missed it." A week later, Alexandra called Jack into her office. She offered him a position as a senior test engineer. Full benefits. Salary 3 times what he was making. A signing bonus. He turned it down. "I appreciate it. I really do. But I don't want to go back to a world where people are measured by their titles. I'm happy where I am. I get to be there for Emma. That's what matters." Alexandra didn't argue, but she understood. For the first time in her life, she understood that success wasn't always about climbing higher. Sometimes it was about knowing when you'd already reached the top of the mountain that mattered. But something had changed between them. Something neither of them could name. He started staying a few minutes after his shift to talk. She started arriving earlier to catch him before he left. They talked about helicopters, about Emma's projects, about nothing important and everything important. And slowly, without either of them planning it, something began to grow. A month later, Alexandra was scheduled to observe a test flight of the H-145, routine maintenance check. Final certification before delivery to the Seattle client. She arrived at the hangar early and saw Jack coordinating the ground crew. He wasn't wearing his janitor uniform. He was wearing a flight suit with a safety vest. She walked over. "I thought you turned down the engineering position." He looked up. "I did. But they asked me to consult on safety protocols for the test flights. Temporary contractor." I said yes. "Why?" "Because Emma asked me if I was ever going to fly again. I told her I didn't need to." She said, "But Dad, you love helicopters." She was right. He smiled. "Turns out you can't hide from 7-year-olds." Alexandra laughed. A real laugh. Light and genuine. After the flight, successful and flawless, she found him near the H-145. The sun was setting, casting gold and orange light across the tarmac. The helicopter gleamed like something out of a dream. She walked up to him, holding something in her hand. A piece of cloth. He recognized it immediately. The rag he'd used to clean his hands that day. "I kept this," she said quietly. "From the day you saved the project." Jack looked at her. "Why?" "Because it reminded me that I'm not always right, and that sometimes the person you least expect is the one who changes everything." She stepped closer. "Do you remember what I said that day? About the kiss?" "Yeah. I didn't mean it. It was cruel. And I'm sorry." "I know." Alexandra looked up at him. Her heart was beating faster than it should. "But I'd like to make a new offer." "What's that?" "I'd like the first kiss to be because I love you, not because you fixed something." Jack's breath caught. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who had spent her whole life building walls. Someone who was finally ready to let them fall. He reached out and took her hand. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The H-145 sat behind them, silent and still. The sky above was turning purple. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Jack leaned down. Alexandra rose up on her toes, and they kissed. Softly, slowly, not because of a bet, not because of a challenge, but because somewhere between the engine and the apology, between the daughter and the dream, two broken people had found a way to be whole. When they pulled apart, Alexandra rested her forehead against his. "Emma's going to be insufferable about this." Jack laughed. "Yeah. She's going to say she knew all along." She probably did. They stood there as the sun disappeared, and the stars came out. And for the first time in years, Alexandra Holt felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in a boardroom, not in a penthouse, but here, with him, under the sky, where helicopters were born and love learned to fly.